At the MegaCon convention in March 2026, Star Wars author Claudia Gray mentioned that Lucasfilm had told her she wasn't allowed to use the character Mara Jade in her stories. Another panelist, the character's creator, Timothy Zahn, confirmed that he'd been told no as well, something he'd previously mentioned at another convention a couple of years earlier. But why? Who is Mara Jade, and why is Lucasfilm so against including her in new stories? Especially when fans and authors seem to want her back, and other Legends characters like Grand Admiral Thrawn and even Jackson from the old Marvel comics have been carried over. Mara Jade was first introduced in Timothy Zahn's 1991 original trilogy sequel novel, Heir to the Empire, the first book in what would come to be known as the Thrawn trilogy. Mara was initially presented as a fast-rising member of smuggler Talon Karrde's underworld organization and had a mysterious grudge against Luke Skywalker. When Luke was captured by Karrde and then escaped, Mara chased him into the wilderness, though both of their ships crashed, and they were forced to travel together while fending off the planet's dangerous wildlife. During their journey, Mara revealed why she hated Luke so much. Before she became a smuggler, she was the Emperor's hand, a Force-sensitive Imperial agent who could hear Palpatine's commands across the galaxy and did the crucial, anonymous dirty work that the Empire's military couldn't handle. She had power and prestige, but lost it all when Palpatine died. And because she was the Emperor's secret agent, barely anybody in the Imperial remnant even knew who she was. As far as Mara knew, Luke killed the Emperor, so she blamed him for ruining her life. After making it back to civilization, Luke and Mara parted ways, with Mara eventually making her way to Grand Admiral Thrawn and striking a deal with him. In exchange for the location of the remote-controlled Katana fleet lost by the Republic before the Clone Wars, Thrawn would leave Karrde's smuggling operation alone. Mara had built a new life there, and she wanted to keep it. Unfortunately, Thrawn betrayed her and took Talon Karrde prisoner, and Mara realized she needed Luke's help to free him, despite the Emperor's last command to her still ringing in her head years later. You will kill Luke Skywalker. After rescuing Karrde, Luke and Mara then took part in a battle against Thrawn to prevent him from taking control of the Katana fleet, and Mara was shot down, later recovering on Coruscant at the former Imperial Palace. During an attack on the palace by Thrawn's agents, Mara then helped save the lives of Princess Leia and her newborn twins, continuing to distance herself from her Imperial past. And thanks to her knowledge of the Empire's secrets, Luke then recruited Mara for a mission to infiltrate the Emperor's secret storehouse. And during their trek through the woods to the base, the two got to know each other in a slightly less confrontational way than their previous jungle journey, and Luke even began to help Mara develop her Force abilities. Eventually, Mara began to believe that it wasn't actually Luke who killed the Emperor, and she decided that if she was going to kill Luke, it would be for her own reasons, not because she couldn't delete the psychic voicemail Palpatine left in her head before he died. Mara was also adamant in her refusal to fall under the sway of Jorah Sabaoth, a deranged Dark Jedi clone who she was worried might replace Palpatine in her life just when it seemed like she was becoming her own person. So, together with Luke, Mara confronted Jorah and satisfied the Emperor's last command by killing a clone of Skywalker made from his lost hand and wielding his lost lightsaber, finally freeing herself from Palpatine's, or anyone's, control. When the dust settled, Mara decided to accept Luke's offer to become a liaison between Karrde's Smuggler Alliance and the New Republic, with Luke even giving her his father's lightsaber to help her on her path towards the light. Mara continued on that path in 1994's Jedi Academy trilogy, where she joined Luke's Jedi Academy on Yavin 4, though she considered their relationship to be a truce rather than a true friendship. She didn't stay for long, though, and soon left to help the Smugglers Alliance and Lando Calrissian on a mission to oust the administrator of Kessel's spice mines. After the Jedi Academy trilogy, Mara appeared in Children of the Jedi, apparently having developed her professional relationship with Lando into a personal one, and provided some helpful information to Han and Leia before discovering that she wasn't the only Emperor's hand, and Palpatine had lied to her about her importance. Mara's next outing in the novels was Darksaber in 1995, where she returned to the Jedi Academy to tell Luke that the Smugglers Alliance suspected the Hutts were up to something beyond their usual criminal antics, and because she found herself actually looking forward to seeing him again. Her relationship with Lando had ended before the start of the book, but any potential romantic interaction with Luke had to wait, because at the time, he was dating a Jedi from the Clone Wars whose mind had been trapped in a computer after her death and now occupied the body of one of his students, which is a whole other thing. After that brief interaction with Luke, Mara then showed up in the Corellian trilogy the same year, graduating to being the head of her own small trading company and helping Han and Leia foil the plans of Han's evil cousin. 1998's Mysteries of the Sith then saw Mara becoming the protagonist in a Star Wars video game. An expansion to 1997's Jedi Knight Mysteries of the Sith saw Mara take over player character duties from series mainstay Kyle Katarn, who she'd spent some time training with, and then had to rescue from the dark side after he disappeared investigating an ancient Sith world. Mara also appeared in a couple other video games, and throughout the decade racked up dozens of appearances in comics, short stories, the collectible card game, and even the Return of the Jedi radio drama. This first era of Mara's life in the Star Wars universe then came to an end with the Hand of Thrawn duology, set 10 years after the original Thrawn trilogy and written by Mara's creator, Timothy Zahn. In the second book in the duology, 1998's Vision of the Future, Mara and Luke investigated the lingering threat of the deceased Grand Admiral Thrawn, and grew closer in the process. Mara helped Luke see some of the mistakes he'd made as a Jedi Master, and Luke helped Mara understand that the darkness of her past wouldn't always dominate her destiny. The romantic relationship between the two became solidified as well, with the pair exchanging barbs about all the Landos and possessed students they dated instead of each other, and the duology ended with Luke asking Mara to marry him if they survived the mission. The first book to depict Mara as Mrs. Skywalker was 1999's Vector Prime, the first novel in the New Jedi Order series, with her wedding to Luke being shown in the Union comic miniseries, published at the end of '99 and into early 2000. As Luke Skywalker's wife and eventually the mother of his child, Mara became a much more prominent figure in the expanded universe in the 21st century, though a lot of the things that helped to define her in the early years began to fall away. Her association with the Smugglers' Alliance became less and less relevant, while her connection to Luke and the Jedi strengthened, with Mara eventually becoming a member of the new Jedi High Council. Her independent galaxy-hopping adventures stopped when she had to prioritize the safety of her son, and those important family connections eventually led to her demise when she confronted her Sith Lord nephew about his grooming of her son to be his apprentice. And while that side of Mara was a major part of her life, it occupied half the time she spent as a living character in the universe, that's also the part of her that Lucasfilm can't use. Luke Skywalker doesn't have a wife, he doesn't have a son, and that's just the way things are. But the great thing about Mara is that there's a lot more to her than just that. She wasn't created so that Luke could have a girlfriend in the expanded universe. She was created as a character first, and her popularity prompted Lucasfilm to give her a bigger and bigger role in the story. In fact, according to Jedi Academy trilogy author Kevin J. Anderson, the Jedi woman renting out the body of Luke's apprentice, she was originally intended by Lucasfilm to be the great love of Luke's life, but they changed their mind when they saw how popular Mara Jade was becoming, leading to the hints in Darksaber that there might be something going on between them that had yet to fully develop. So ironically, her popularity as a standalone character was what ended up tethering her to Luke, and Luke now being a canonical Vol cell means that, unlike a character like Grand Admiral Thrawn, Mara's whole deal can't just be plucked from the Legends continuity and dropped into new stories as is. But there's also another option that's not ideal. Remember when I said that Mara was training with a guy called Kyle Katarn in Mysteries of the Sith? Well, Kyle also made the jump over to the current continuity, though he didn't arrive in one piece. His story, as depicted in the Dark Forces Jedi Knight video game series, saw him starting out as a Briar pistol-slinging mercenary working for the Rebels, with his first mission in the player's hands being the single-handed theft of the Death Star plans from a secret Imperial facility. From there, he foiled the proliferation of the Empire's new Dark Troopers, raced against a group of Dark Force users to discover the hidden Valley of the Jedi while discovering his own Force powers, fell to the dark side, got redeemed, gave up the Force to return to his life as a mercenary, then reconnected with it to avenge the supposed death of his pilot girlfriend Jan Ors, and eventually took on the role of a teacher at Luke's academy, becoming an instructor to the next generation of Jedi. Kyle did a lot of fun stuff during his games, but most of it isn't stuff that really works with the current canon, and a lot of his feats are now attributed to other similar characters. The theft of the Death Star plans is now the accomplishment of Cassian Andor and Jyn Erso rather than Kyle Katarn and Jan Ors, and the Andor television show even gave Kyle a nod by having Cassian wield his iconic Briar pistol. The video game about a blaster-slinging Jedi racing against evil Force users to discover the location of a hidden Jedi outpost now stars Cal Kestis, and you can even make him cosplay as Kyle in the game. And the teacher of the next generation of Jedi, whose closet is full of shoulder pads and whose girlfriend is a pilot voiced by Vanessa Marshall, is now Star Wars Rebels' Kanan Jarrus. And beyond Kyle himself, the Dark Troopers he fought are now under the purview of Moff Gideon. The Jedi Academy he taught at burned to the ground, and the only Dark Jedi that rose to a place of prominence within the Imperial remnant is Bigger Luke. Between Cassian, Cal, and Kanan, Kyle doesn't really have a place in the current Star Wars landscape. His primary role in the Star Wars universe was as an avatar for the player to experience it, and the things the player did while in his shoes were more important than actually making Kyle himself a really fleshed out character. So because his achievements have been picked up by other characters, any attempt to fold him into the new canon would either mean robbing him of everything that made him interesting, or just sticking him in as a familiar name with no substance behind it. So has this also happened to Mara Jade? While not an Emperor's Hand, Battlefront 2's Iden Versio was an Imperial agent who went from literally taking orders from a dead Palpatine to abandoning the Empire and joining the New Republic. And then there's characters like Reva Savander and Barriss Offee, who had sympathetic storylines showing them abandoning their lives as Inquisitors. Or Ahsoka's Shin Hati, who's a young woman trained to use the dark side in a story featuring Grand Admiral Thrawn as a dangerous part of the Imperial remnant. And Mara's post-Imperial role as someone who rose through the ranks of the underworld is also currently occupied by Qi'ra, who followed up her role in Solo by taking over Crimson Dawn in the comics. She even has the whole thing about being a major romantic partner for one of the original trilogy's heroes. So do all these characters preclude Mara from having a place in the current continuity? Is it even worth trying to bring her in knowing her future is off limits and elements of her past have already been claimed? I think so. Did Boba Fett existing stop Jon Favreau from making The Mandalorian? Did The Mandalorian existing stop him from making the Book of Boba Fett? Did the Book of Boba Fett being about Boba Fett stop him from making the show about The Mandalorian anyway? No. A story already existing has never stopped Star Wars from just telling the same story again. There's a reason the Wikipedia has a disambiguation page for Darth Vader's apprentice, and the existence of Lumaya doesn't mean we can't get Starkiller. So, where can we find a place for Mara Jade that keeps her core attributes intact while still respecting the boundaries of canon and doesn't encroach too much on the territory already claimed by other characters? There have already been a few characters who abandoned the Empire and turned to the side of good, but I don't think that's exactly what happened with Mara. I think the core of Mara's story is a search for independence. Not only did she go from being a servant of the Empire to a prominent smuggler and the head of her own organization, when she first appeared in Heir to the Empire, she was being compelled by a dead man to hate somebody she'd never met. She couldn't even control her own feelings. And I think that her romance with Luke wasn't just Lucasfilm giving him a girlfriend that was popular with fans, it was her having gained the independence to feel the way she wanted to feel. Luke just happened to be the token that her feelings revolved around. If Palpatine's last command was for her to kill, Chewbacca, then she'd be running around wearing a hat that says Bigfoot is real and he tried to eat my ass. Mara's journey also doesn't have to revolve around a romantic partner. That choice to love something she's been ordered to hate is just a specific expression of her larger character arc, and there's any number of ways that change can be demonstrated. And that journey to independence, it does work really well when she starts out on the side of the Empire, which represents control and subjugation, so they should keep her there to start out with. And the underworld setting could really embody the freedom and independence she earned throughout her story, so even if Talon Card or the Smugglers Alliance don't exist, something like that is a good place for her to end up. And her journey towards independence and freedom would also be different from what Qi'ra's doing. In the comics, Qi'ra had massive resources at her disposal, and she was willing to exploit them in order to wage her war against the Sith who held the chains of the galaxy. Qi'ra fought to free the galaxy from their influence, but she did it by treating other people as chess pieces. She was even willing to use Han Solo's carbonite-frozen body to further her goals, without freeing the man she once loved from imprisonment. Mara wouldn't be like that. As part of her growth, the control and exploitation she experienced as an agent of the Empire would end with her, and her career in the underworld wouldn't be about amassing power over others, but expressing her own power over herself. And being a Force user absolutely has to stay. Mixing Han Solo and Luke Skywalker is a great combination for a character. It's part of what made Kyle Katarn so popular to play after all. And with so many Force users in the current canon being tied to the Jedi or other organizations, keeping Mara separate helps to reinforce her individuality, and not sending her to train with Luke also keeps her alive throughout the New Republic era that she called home in the Legends continuity. But just because she should still be Force sensitive doesn't mean that she still needs the psychic last command from Palpatine. With Big Sheev now gestating in a tube on Exegol during the New Republic era, giving Mara a telepathic link to him kind of means she wouldn't be free of him until he dies in The Rise of Skywalker. But the Disney continuity already has a workaround for that: inhibitor chips. If Mara has one in her head that provides her orders remotely, she could still receive all the same subconscious urging to carry out her missions, and there would also be other avenues to make those orders stop that don't involve conveniently stumbling upon a clone of the guy she was ordered to kill. And speaking of clones, given how many clones went rogue after Order 66, the Empire's later inhibitor chips would probably have some safeguards to prevent people from just taking them out. And who knows, maybe the Emperor's direct role in her missions could be replaced by one of the Sentinel droids that bear his face, giving Mara a Palpatine-shaped hole in her brain without locking out her ability to move past it for 30 years. But regardless of all the things surrounding her character, she still has to be a character. People liked her because they liked her, so her personality has to stay intact as well. Mara's history as the Emperor's Hand influences how she speaks, how she thinks, and everything she does. She's efficient and pragmatic, constantly alert for threats and living her life in survivor mode. Her core personality is also a little antisocial. She can be blunt and cold to other people and tends to use sarcasm to deflate superior-feeling opponents or even cut through the BS of her allies. But she's also a spy. She's adept at blending in or standing out when necessary and can be appropriately charming or demure if the situation calls for it. If she's being a cold, sarcastic asshole towards you, you're seeing the real her, which means you're either on the road to becoming a friend or you're about to die. Mara is also incredibly loyal. When she was developing a relationship with Luke in the Hand of Thrawn books, Mara asked him how she could have served Palpatine for so long without being on the dark side herself. Luke eventually came to the conclusion that because the dark side is rooted in selfishness, Mara's actions, as bad as many of them were, weren't done to advance her own personal power. They were done in service to a larger cause. When Mara broke from the Empire, that loyalty carried on to Talon Karrde's smugglers and eventually her family, with her loyalty and devotion to her son leading to her death at the hands of Han and Leia's. And that balance is what can make her a compelling character regardless of whether her exact story beats or character relationships can be transferred over from the Legends continuity. She's a killer and an asshole, but she's the kind of killer and asshole who will fight to the death for you if she's in your corner. None of Mara's characterization is rooted in things that are completely incompatible with the Disney continuity, and the things that made her initial character arc interesting are things that could be easily reinterpreted. So we know that she would work, but where do you put her? Even though this is a video all about Mara Jade, I don't think the right way to introduce her is with a story that's all about Mara Jade. Despite how long she was a major part of the Legends continuity, the Disney canon has been running without her for over a decade. So using her as the face of a major project is risky, since a big chunk of the audience won't be familiar with her. It's also not historically the way Star Wars does things. Thrawn appeared as a villain in Rebels before getting some more focus in novels and comics. Dr. Aphra only spun off into her own series after being introduced in the Darth Vader comics, and characters like Ahsoka and Cassian Andor didn't make their debut in their self-titled TV shows. And even stories that are about totally new characters still have some hook that doesn't require the audience to be familiar with them. Rogue One was about the theft of the Death Star plans, a major event in Star Wars history that's pivotal to the original film. The Mandalorian had the novelty of being the first live-action Star Wars television series, and its main character didn't even have a name when it first aired. Instead, the show banked on the Mandalorian archetype being popular enough to make people interested. The Acolyte was the live-action debut of the entire High Republic era, and it promised a deeper look into the Sith during the time when they were thought to be extinct. And Skeleton Crew used genre as a way in. It was an Amblin adventure movie with a Star Wars coat of paint. So making a movie or TV show that exists purely as a vehicle to introduce a particular character from the Legends continuity isn't realistic. You might be able to get away with giving her a starring role in a novel or comic miniseries, but people would want to see her on screen. And while those translations do happen, they're pretty rare, and books and comics can sometimes be ignored if a higher tier form of media wants to go in a different direction. So the Mara Jade that shows up in a novel might not be the same one that shows up somewhere else. So I think she'd need to be introduced as part of another story, one that's on TV or in movie theaters. But unlike putting Thrawn into Rebels, that would be a lot harder for Mara. Thrawn's a pretty static character. In his debut appearance in Legends, he was already at the top of his game, and then he died by the end of the trilogy without really growing or changing. He's a very intelligent Imperial Grand Admiral, and that's an archetype that's really easy to make room for. The villain of Rebels could have been a brand new character, but making him Thrawn raises the stakes and excites fans without overshadowing the main characters, and it also doesn't detract from his character. But that wouldn't be the case with Mara. Including her without including some version of her journey would detract from her character, and giving her the focus she needs to tell that story could very easily overshadow whatever the rest of the show is about. And I think it would make the most sense to include her in a TV show, one that's got at least a season under its belt and has proven that people will show up for it regardless of what kind of cameos make an appearance. It would also need to be a show that's already relevant to Mara's character and could include her in a major way without overshadowing the ongoing story for the sake of fan service. Unless the show is an anthology that doesn't have any ongoing stories or characters to conflict with. I think the best way to introduce Mara Jade into the Disney continuity would be to give her a spotlight in either Star Wars Visions or a series of the Star Wars Tales series focused on the New Republic. Visions could act as a safe way to revisit the character in the modern era without necessarily having to make her canonical. It wouldn't have the runtime to really dive into her story, but it could serve as a sizzle reel or backdoor pilot to generate interest in the character in the same way The Ninth Jedi is being expanded into a full series. With a hypothetical Tales of the New Republic, Mara would probably get 3 full episodes to focus on her firmly canonical, but still self-contained journey towards freedom and independence, which could serve as a microcosm of how the galaxy transitions out of life under the Empire and lead to live-action appearances down the line. But regardless of what approach you might want to take, solving a problem like Mara requires actually engaging with her, rather than just ignoring her and barring authors from even trying. And the outright refusal to even entertain the idea just shows how strong a character she is. If she wasn't important, they wouldn't care. That's why Jackson is back. And the best part is, she's already kinda in there. The Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes mobile game added Mara as a playable character in 2021, and while the battles in the game aren't canon, the premise is. The game could have been a contextless, non-canonical battle simulator, but the developers went out of their way to format it as a holographic game within the Star Wars universe, and the game's original Jedi Knight Guardian character ended up appearing in the Age of Republic comic series, so it's not just a self-contained ecosystem. So Mara Jade already exists in canon, even if it's only as a video game character that might not be based on a real person in the universe, but the seal on her has been broken, so why not give her a chance? But who knows? Maybe they just don't want to include her because they know whatever approach they take, they're gonna piss someone off, and they don't want to divide Star Wars fans any more than they already are. So it might be a bad idea to bring Mara Jade back into canon in a major way, but I don't think there's any idea worse than having no ideas at all.